All right, guys, we are going to get started on our first day of notes. And our first unit is prehistory and the beginning of civilization. As we go through these notes, you are going to want to have the notes printed out to go along with it. They're the fill in the blank notes that you can find on Blackboard, and we showed you how to get to those. As we go through the notes, you're going to want to circle or highlight important words that we go over. Those are going to be vocab words, and you'll need to know them for the tests. If you don't have access to a printer, you can always take your own notes. Some people like to do that anyway, and that would be perfectly fine. If you miss a set of notes, for whatever reason you can't attend class, the notes are posted on Blackboard. But if you want the notes with the voice recording like we're doing right now, we'll post a link to YouTube so you'll have access to that. And finally, before we get started, you'll want to open up the Google Doc. I put the link in the chat on Blackboard Collaborate, and you'll answer some questions as we go through these notes, and then you'll turn it in at the end of the class. Okay? So this unit is going to focus on the prehistoric era. So we need to know what prehistory is. Prehistory is the time before written history begins, so the time before we have a system of writing. And that's roughly 5,000 years ago and beyond. And without a system of writing, it's very difficult to figure out how people live their lives. So scientists have to come together to study the prehistoric past using some different methods. We have different scientists who look at the prehistoric past. We have geologists, and those are scientists who study how the land was formed. We have paleontologists. Those are scientists who study prehistoric times, like dinosaurs and fossils, things like that. When we think of paleontologists, we think of the scientists who were in Jurassic Park. We also have anthropologists, and that's going to be one of the vocab words. That's why it's underlined there. So make sure you underline it on your own notes. An anthropologist is a scientist who will study people and the people's culture. And that is both past and present people. So then what is culture? Culture are unique customs or ways of living that people have. So take a few seconds and in the comments, jot down some examples of culture. What makes up culture? Give you guys 20 to 30 seconds to jot those ideas down in the comments. What are some examples of culture? What makes up a culture? So some examples of culture could be the music that people listen to, and from there, their style of dance, clothing that they wear, religion, what they eat. All those things make up culture. So culture is what an anthropologist would study. We have archaeologists, another vocab word, so make sure you circle it. An archaeologist is a scientist who studies past people. And they're like the detectives who are looking for clues to uncover the story of prehistoric people. Again, without writing, we're going to see what they're actually looking at to put this puzzle together. Finally, we have the historian. A historian is a scholar, and they use facts that all these other scientists have gathered and piece them together to explain past events and tell us the story of what happened. Here we have a photograph of an archaeologist on a dig, and he's looking for artifacts and fossils, things that will help him piece together how these people lived. So archaeology is the study of the human past. And scientists are going to use many different things to try to put together how humans lived. And it's very difficult before we have written records. So they're going to use artifacts. Artifacts are any item that was used by man. A prehistoric artifact could be something as simple as a rock, which might be used to crack bones or nuts in order for those early humans to eat. If you were an archaeologist 2,000 years from the future, and you were trying to figure out how humans in 2020 lived, an artifact that you might find would be a cell phone, and that could tell you a lot about these people. Archaeologists would be looking for human remains, bones, corpses. A corpse is a dead body, and mummies. Mummies are preserved corpses. And the most famous examples of those are found in Egypt. They'll look at DNA, which is genetic material. It can tell you a lot about how a person lived, what they would be like, even their ethnicity. Fossils are evidence of living things preserved in the earth. Okay, so bones and things like that. Ruins are the remains of human dwellings. Cities, towns, and buildings would be example of ruins. If you've been to the city of Rome, there are Roman ruins that you can look at, like the Colosseum. Eventually, we will get to the period of recorded history, and we have ancient records. And now that people are writing, if we can decipher it, if we can figure out what the writing means, then we'll understand how these people lived. We'll have a much better insight to what they were doing on a day-to-day basis. Finally, we have detritus, and that's human waste and trash, and that can tell us a lot about people, how people lived as well. Things like what they ate, okay, by looking through their waste. So detritus is very important. And even today, if an archaeologist was trying to figure out what your life was like, they'd look at your trash, and that could tell us what was important to you, what was not important. Did you have a lot of something? In which case you'd see lots of boxes of it in the trash because you could throw it away, you could use it. So detritus tells us a lot about how people lived. So examples of artifacts would be found in the prehistoric age. What are we looking at? You can answer that in the comments. These are scrapers. They would be rocks that are filed down to make them somewhat sharp, and you could use that to scrape meat off of a bone. Here we have a recreation of a prehistoric hut, okay, built out of stones. These prehistoric huts were not meant to be permanent residences, but they'd be used for a season, and then these early people would move on and follow the herds of animals that they were going to hunt. These are pictures of weapons that were made once humans understood how to use metal. And they would start creating metal weapons and tools. We have arrowheads and spearheads and very early saws. Here we have a Stone Age knife replica. A replica is a recreation, so it's not the original. The blade is made of flint, which can be chipped away in order to give it a sharp edge and a point. And it also has a wooden handle. So with that being said, would this be considered a fossil or would it be an artifact? Take about 10 seconds to think about that. Is it a fossil or an artifact? And in the comments, give your answer. And it is actually both. Okay, it is an artifact because we know it was used by man. It was a tool, possibly a weapon, but it's also a fossil. If you look, the handle is made out of wood and of course comes from a tree, and the tree was once living. So it's a fossil as well. Does anybody have an idea of what's holding it together. You can see it right there. What could that be? And it could be a few different things. It could be a strip of dried out intestines or a ligament or tendon from an animal, and they would wrap it around to connect the blade to the handle, and as it dries, it tightens. It could also be fiber from a plant. Okay, so another clue that this is a fossil as well as an artifact. Here we have a painting that would be found on the walls of a cave that was created by early humans. And it's of an animal, some sort of early horse. So what I want you to do is go ahead and open up that page from the link I posted at the beginning of the notes. It's the exit ticket for the prehistory notes. And answer that first question. If you were an early human living during this time period, why would you paint this in your cave? And what would you use it for? So go ahead and answer that question on that Google form, that exit ticket that I posted a link to earlier in the set of notes. I'm going to give you guys 20, 30 seconds to think about it. How would you use it? How would you use this painting? Okay, so hopefully you had answers like maybe they used it to tell a story. Maybe someone was trying to show off the animal they were trying to hunt and that they killed and brought the meat back for everyone to enjoy. Maybe it was a teaching tool. Maybe one of the elders was showing the children, hey, we're looking for this animal to hunt because it doesn't attack us back. They might have another animal that might be more dangerous and say, hey, we need to stay away from this one. And it might have also been used for target practice. You could take your spear and throw it against the wall and work on your aim. So how do archaeologists figure out how old an artifact actually is? They'll use two methods. The first is strata. Strata are the layers of the earth, and that can provide a chronological record, but it's not going to tell you an exact date of how old an artifact is. And we'll see how that works in just a little bit. The second method is radiocarbon dating, which measures the radioactive decay of the carbon isotope in living matter to determine the age. So you can figure out how old the bones, an animal would be by looking at its bones and measuring the radioactive decay. You could do that for a tree trunk as well. But it wouldn't work on something like a rock. It only works on living things. And your science teacher would probably be able to describe the process of radiocarbon dating much better than I could. So if we look at the picture on the bottom, we can see these different layers in the earth when it's been cut away. Here's another example of strata. And if you're driving west on 66 headed towards like West Virginia and you're getting into the mountains, they've had to carve out a lot of these mountains, and you can actually look and see the strata, or the different layers as you pass through. So we've got our archaeologist who is trying to figure out how old these artifacts and fossils are. And this can't give us an exact date, but it can tell us relative to another artifact how old something is. So the deeper you would find the artifact, the deeper the layer it's in, the older it's going to be. And if it's closer to the surface, well, that's closer to modern day. So it won't give us an exact date, but it gives us a good reference point. Here we have an example of a mummy, and this mummy was named Utsi. and also called the Iceman because he was found in the Alps. The Alps are in Europe, and he was found between Italy and Austria. So he's looking pretty good for about 5,000 years old. He was mummified because as he died, he was covered up in snow and ice, so his body didn't completely decay. And this is great for an archaeologist because this mummy is going to tell them a lot about how people lived 5,000 years ago. So go ahead and go back to that Google form exit ticket, and we're going to answer question number 2. What are 3 things an archaeologist would look at to try to determine what Ötzi's life was like? Go ahead and take 30 seconds, 45 seconds to do that. Three things that an archaeologist would use to figure out what Ötzi's life was like. Okay, so some of the things you might have come up with would be this tool he has with him, this hatchet, okay? And it was made out of copper, so we know at this point in Ötzi's life, they knew how to make weapons from metal, not just stone. You might notice what Ötzi is wearing. He's wearing many layers of clothing, okay, showing that he was prepared to go on this hike in the mountains. One of the most important things that Ötzi has on his head is this cap, okay, this hat. And it was actually made out of bear skin. And according to archaeologists, it was so well made, they didn't think Ötzi made it himself. They think that there were actual tailors back then, people who made clothes by sewing different animal furs and fabrics together. We know that he had a bow and arrow set. And archaeologists were able to piece together what happened to him. Using the mummy, they found out that he had been hit by arrows, and either the arrows or being exposed to the cold for such a long period of time caused him to die. So we know that he was around other people before his death. So again, just based on that mummy and the items found around him, archaeologists can piece together the story of Ötzi and what happened to him. So using fossils, mummies, other artifacts, an archaeologist is going to come up with facts about what they found. And they're going to use those facts to develop a theory. So a fact is evidence that is true and cannot be disputed. So our fact for today, LeBron James, if you measure him, he is 6 foot 9 inches tall. So based on that fact, if you were to not know anything about basketball and not know who LeBron James was, you might come up with a theory that this guy who's walking around at 6 foot 9 inches tall is a good basketball player. So that's your theory based on the fact that this guy is so tall. So from there, we also have opinions. An opinion is an argument based on personal beliefs. So someone might have the opinion that LeBron James is the greatest basketball player of all time. And one of your other friends might say, well, no, my opinion is that Michael Jordan is the best. And it's going to be very hard to come up with a clear-cut conclusion based on opinions because you don't have all the facts. And there's different statistics that might back up different opinions. So historians break up time into eras. An era is a distinct period of time with its own unique characteristics. An era can be something really big, lasting thousands of years, or it could be something much smaller and only last a few years. Something small and close to us that could be considered an era here at Woodson would be the era of Dr. Floyd. She's our principal. Before Dr. Floyd, we had another principal named Dr. Poole. We might have called that the Dr. Poole era. So it could be something relatively close to us. But we're going to talk about a much larger scale of time. And we're going to talk about the prehistoric era. And we call this the Stone Age. And you can guess why. It's because they're using stone tools and weapons. They don't have access to metal. We'll see later on when we get into the Bronze Age and the Iron Age that we're going to use better, stronger, sharper tools and weapons. But right now, stone tools, that's what's in fashion. From there, we break up the Stone Age into two periods. The first is the Paleolithic Age, or Old Stone Age. Paleo means old, lithic is Stone Age. And that's going to last from 2.5 million BCE to 8000 BCE. So most of human history took place in the Paleolithic Age, and this is when humans live as nomads. They don't have permanent homes. They live as hunter-gatherers. They follow sources of food like mammoths and other mammals in order to eat. It's during this time that they make the first stone tools, very simple stone tools. They're going to develop spoken language and they will create cave art. A big change happens around 8000 BCE, and we call this part of the Stone Age the Neolithic Age. Neo means new, lithic is Stone Age, and it will last around 5,000 years, up until 3000 BCE. And this was a game changer for humans because we develop agriculture for the first time. And agriculture means farming. And that means that humans are finally going to be able to settle down, and we're going to see them develop new skills like writing and develop new technologies like the wheel and the sail. We also have ice ages. And these are 4 periods of extreme cold, and during that time, huge glaciers form over the Earth. So we have sheets of ice that cover about 2/3 of the Earth's surface. And because we have these huge glaciers, the glaciers are made up of water, and in order for these to form, water is sucked out of the Earth's oceans. So the sea level drops, and we end up seeing land bridges between Asia and America, and Asia and Australia. The one between Asia and America is now the Bering Strait. And it's between Russia and Alaska. If you've ever watched Deadliest Catch, that's where they're out on their boats while they're out there trying to fish. Hominids, and hominid is an early human, another good vocab word, so I would circle that word hominid. Hominids are going to migrate over these land bridges, going from Asia to America. But we're going to find out that hominids began in Africa and spread out throughout the world from there. Here we have a glacier. These are these slow-moving sheets of ice that would creep south during the ice ages, and with them they would bring things like boulders and stones and just scrape and carve into the land as they went across the Earth. Here we can see how far south these glaciers went, okay, into North America, into what's now the United States, right about there. We can also see routes that early humans took to get to the Americas from Asia. We can see them crossing what today is the Bering Strait between Alaska and Russia. We think that they might have went by small canoes as well, staying very close to the coast, making lots of stops along the way. There's also theories about people migrating from Australia to South America, but let's forget about that one right now. That one's in the early process of being a theory, and we don't have a lot of facts about it. So here we have a full map looking at the glaciers which covered the Earth during the time of the Ice Age. We also see that humans begin in Africa. We're going to talk a lot about that coming up. Okay, the earliest humans come from Africa, and they're going to migrate looking for sources of food. Some will go to Europe. Some will go to Asia using the land bridges during the ice ages. Some will even make it to Australia. Others will go to the Americas. So how do we measure time? Well, we talked about what an era was. An era is a period of time with unique traits. But if you were to break time down year by year, for us, it would look like a number line. And if you were to put a 0 in the middle of that number line, anything happens before that 0 would be considered BC, or before Christ. And anything after that 0 would be AD, which means Anno Domini, which is Latin for in the year of our Lord, referring to Jesus Christ. So when we talk about BC and AD, we call that Christian or Western time. But as historians, we want to take away the religious connotation when it comes to the study of history. So instead of BC, we use BCE, before Common Era. So that's the same time period as BC. It's what takes place before that 0 on the number line, on the timeline. And then CE is Common Era, and that would take place of the AD that we used to use. So we call BCE and CE scientific time. So we live in 2020 CE. So here on our last slide, you're going to go back and look at that Google form and answer 2 questions. The first is, if you were looking at this timeline at the bottom of the slide, we're in the year 2020 CE. And what we want to know is, how long ago was 1000 BCE? So if we were to put it on the number line, it'd be about here. So how long ago was it from today, 2020 CE, to 1000 BCE? Take 20 seconds to answer that question, and we'll talk about how we got there. Okay, so the answer to that question is 3,020 years. Okay, you've got to go back from 2020, and that takes to 0, and that takes 2020 years. From 0, we have to get to 1000 BCE. That takes 1,000 years, so we take those 2 numbers and add them together. And that gives us 3,020 years. So the next question that I'll ask, and you guys will fill out on the Google form, how long ago is 1000 CE? That would be right about here. How many years ago was 1000 CE? And once you get that answer written down, it actually takes 1020 years. Because we're staying on the same side of the number line, all we're doing is subtracting. So to go from 2020 CE to 1000 CE takes 1020 years. We just subtract. Okay, we'll work on that more in the future, but that's the end of the first set of notes. We only have like 46 more sets of notes to go through this year.